Welcome, dear listener, to a place that asks nothing of you except that you breathe. A place where the world is softened at the edges, where firelight flickers in slow amber pulses against old stone, and the air carries that comforting blend of wood smoke and warmth, as if the night itself is curled up beside you to keep watch. Tonight we travel gently, no rushing, no sharp corners. Tonight we step into the wizarding world through a story that is quiet in its strength and tender in its courage. A story stitched together with loyalty, second chances, and the kind of love that does not care whether it is admired. We turn our attention to a soul as wide as the mountains and as soft as new spring grass. A man whose hands could lift a dragon's egg without trembling, and also steady a broken wing with the patience of someone who knows what it means to be fragile. This is the story of Rubeus Hagrid. So settle now, dear listener. Let the weight of the day slide off your shoulders. Let the noise of everything you've carried loosen its grip. If you'd like, close your eyes and imagine yourself in a worn, welcoming armchair. A thick quilt rests across your knees. The hearth crackles nearby, popping softly now and then, as if it's whispering its own little secrets. Outside the window, the night is deep and calm. The sky is scattered with stars like spilled salt, and beyond the glass, the forbidden forest stands silent. Ancient branches braided together, darkness pooled at the roots, wind threading through leaves like a quiet lullaby. Somewhere far off, an owl calls once, a single soft note, and then the world returns to stillness. Here, in this place between waking and dreaming, we begin where Hagrid began. Not in a castle, not in a grand estate, not under chandeliers or in polished halls. Our story begins in a small, sturdy cottage tucked into the rolling green hills of England's West Country, a place where hedgerows curved like sleepy waves, where fields shimmered after rain, and where magic and the ordinary world brushed against each other so closely that sometimes you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. It was in that cottage, on a cold December night in 1928, that Rubeus Hagrid was born, a child balanced between two worlds. His father was a wizard, not famous, not powerful in the way the wizarding world tends to applaud, but steady, quiet, the sort of man whose magic lived in practical places. A charm to mend a tear, a spell to keep frost from biting too hard, a gentle warming of a kettle before morning light. His name didn't survive in the grand books of history. But names are not the same as legacies. The legacy he left behind was simple and enormous. Love that asked for nothing except the chance to be given. Hagrid's mother, however, came from a world that did not measure love the same way. Her name was Fridwulfa, Hashim, a giantess of the mountains, towering and fierce, ancient-blooded and proud. She stood some 20 feet tall when fully grown, her strength shaped by harsh winds and harsher laws, the brutal hierarchy of giant clans, where gentleness is not admired, and tenderness can be mistaken for weakness. How a wizard and a giantess ever found each other, how they bridged such an impossible distance, remains one of those stories the world never wrote down properly. Perhaps it began with curiosity. Perhaps it began with loneliness. Perhaps it began with something neither of them expected, a recognition, a sudden moment where two very different hearts saw the same kind of emptiness in each other and reached across it. Whatever the beginning was, it happened. It was real. And on that winter night, it became something irreversible. You can almost feel the tension of it, if you imagine it slowly enough. The cottage straining at its seams, the wind pressing against the walls, the midwife witch pale with disbelief, and Hagrid's father pacing outside beneath the winter stars with his wand clenched tight, as if he could hold the whole world together by sheer stubborn hope. And then the cry came. Not the thin, reedy wail of an ordinary infant, but something louder, fuller, a cry with weight and strength behind it, a sound that made the rafters tremble, as if the baby was announcing himself to the night. Rubeus Hagrid had arrived. From his first breath, it was obvious he was different. Too large, too strong, too small, too solid for a world that often prefers its children small, tidy, easily understood. His grip could bend the iron bars of a cradle. His limbs were thick-boned, heavy with potential. And yet, and this mattered even if no one knew it yet, his eyes held a softness that would define him for the rest of his life. Dark, wide, curious eyes. Not cruel, not hard. Just gentle, as if he'd been born already carrying an instinctive understanding of how easily things break. His father must have looked down at him and felt that fierce, immediate surge of love, the kind that steals your breath, and, tangled up inside it, that quieter thread of fear. Because the wizarding world can be unkind, it can be suspicious, it can be narrow. And when it sees something it doesn't understand, it often reaches first for labels. Dangerous, improper, shameful, wrong. A half-giant child would never be invisible, and people are often cruelest to what they cannot ignore. As for Fridwulfer, it is difficult to imagine her feelings with certainty. Giants were not raised to value softness. They lived in a world of strength and dominance, where affection is rare and vulnerability can be punished. A child who was part wizard, part small blood, as some giants might dismiss it, may have seemed like a mistake. Or an embarrassment, or simply a weight she did not want to carry. And so, when Hagrid was still very young, she left. When he was only 3 years old, still a clumsy toddler who could topple a chair by leaning too hard, Fridwulfer walked away from the cottage on the hill and returned to the mountains. There were no letters, no visits, no goodbye that Hagrid could remember, just absence. A hole in his life, shaped exactly like a mother. She vanished from him, as if she'd been a dream he'd almost remembered, leaving behind only the proof of her blood in his height and strength, and a loneliness that settled quietly inside him, like a stone dropped into deep water. Hagrid's father never spat bitterness. He never poisoned his son with resentment. He didn't speak ill of Fridwulfer. If anything, he spoke as little about her as possible, perhaps hoping silence would hurt less than harsh truth. He raised Hagrid alone. He did it with patience, with tenderness, with the careful courage of someone who knows the world will not always be kind to the child he loves. But even love cannot answer every question. Children ask things with their whole hearts. Sometimes they don't even speak the question out loud. It just lives in the way they pause, the way they stare too long at the door, the way they flinch when other people mention mothers, as if it's a normal thing everyone has. Why did she leave? Was I not enough? Was I too much? Hagrid grew quickly, far more quickly than any ordinary wizard child. By 6, he was already taller than most adults in the village. By 8, he had hands too big to hold small toys properly. His clothes needed constant patching, expanding, stretching. His boots wore thin in weeks. The cottage that once felt sturdy began to feel cramped around him, as though it might crack if he turned too sharply. So Hagrid learned, early, to be careful. He learned to move slowly, like someone carrying a cup filled to the brim. He learned to cradle delicate things with gentleness that seemed almost unnatural for someone so strong. Fallen baby birds, fragile dishes, his father's spellbooks, with their thin, aging pages. He learned to speak softly, even though his voice naturally rumbled, deep and rolling, like faraway thunder. He learned to tilt his head down, to fold his shoulders a little, as if he could make himself smaller by willpower alone. But the world noticed him anyway. Local children, some magical, some not, didn't know what to do with a boy who was too large and too strange. They whispered, they pointed, they invented cruel games and crueler names. Some ran away shrieking just because he walked too close. Others stared as if he were a curiosity. Hagrid tried to bear it quietly. But sadness doesn't always show itself as tears. Sometimes it shows itself as retreat. So he retreated, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in longing for a place where he didn't have to explain himself. He found it in the woods and fields beyond the cottage. There, among brambles and hedges and long grass, Hagrid discovered something simple and healing. Animals did not judge him. A family of hedgehogs nesting beneath a hedge did not care how large his hands were. A fox with a wounded paw didn't whisper cruel names. It only trembled and then relaxed when Hagrid sat down slowly and offered food. A barn owl that roosted under the cottage eaves didn't flinch at his size. It only hooted softly to him on sleepless nights, as if keeping him company. The trees did not stare. The creatures did not gossip. The wild places simply accepted. And in those wild places, Hagrid found his first true friends. His father watched all of this, pride mixed with worry. He taught Hagrid what magic he could. Small household charms, the proper grip on a wand, the importance of intention and focus. But Hagrid's magic did not behave neatly. It was wild, emotional, untamed, as if his power had grown faster than his control. When Hagrid laughed, something might bloom that had no right to bloom in winter. When he grew upset, objects sometimes swelled larger or shattered without being touched. Once, when he cried after being mocked by a group of children, the kettle in the kitchen trembled and then cracked straight down the middle as if it had been struck. Hagrid didn't understand it. He didn't mean to do it. And his father, though gentle, worried in the quiet way that parents do. The way worry lives behind the eyes even when the voice tries to stay warm. One night, as the two of them sat by the hearth firelight, painting their faces in soft gold, his father spoke the promise that Hagrid would cling to like a lifeline. "You'll go to Hogwarts," he told him. "When you're 11, they'll teach you properly there. You'll learn control. You'll find your place." Hagrid held on to those words. Hogwarts. A place where magic wasn't hidden. A place where the strange was normal. A place where he might belong. At night he dreamed of it. Towers and staircases, candlelit halls, students in robes, secrets in stone. He'd never seen the castle, but in his imagination it became a warm shape on the horizon, a future waiting for him, if he could just reach it. But time moved in its slow, ordinary way, and the years in the cottage passed, marked by growth spurts and patched sleeves and quiet evenings by the fire. Hagrid grew, and his father aged too quickly. The strain of raising an unusual child alone took its toll. The world is not built to accommodate the extraordinary without cost. And in 1938, when Hagrid was 9 years old, his father fell ill. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive with thunder. It came quietly. A creeping sickness that stole strength, stole breath, stole warmth. Hagrid, still a child despite his size, tried everything he knew how to do. He brewed potions with hands too large for delicate work. He kept the fire burning. He read aloud in his careful rumbling voice, as if words could anchor his father to the world. But some endings cannot be charmed away. His father died in the spring, when the hills were bright green and the world was waking up as if nothing had happened. He died peacefully, holding Hagrid's enormous hand, and his last words were gentle and certain. "You're a good lad, Rubeus. Don't let anyone tell you different." Afterwards, Hagrid buried him beneath an oak tree in the garden. He dug the earth with hands that could lift stones. And yet, he moved like someone terrified of breaking something precious. Then he stood over the grave and felt the world become too large. The cottage became hollow. The nights became longer. The silence pressed against him like a physical weight. The summer after his father's death was the longest of Hagrid's life. He remained in the cottage because he didn't know where else to go. He tended the garden as if routine could stitch him back together. He cared for the animals because they were the only steady things left. He waited, though he didn't know what he was waiting for. Rescue, perhaps, or direction, or simply proof that the future hadn't disappeared with his father's last breath. The ministry might have intervened. They might have placed him with relatives, or in some grim arrangement that didn't know what to do with a half-giant boy. But before anything could happen, a letter arrived. It came by owl, of course, because in the wizarding world, the most important things always arrive on wings. It was delivered on a late July morning when the air smelled of wild thyme and clover, when the sun hung warm over the fields, as if trying to be kind. The envelope was thick, the ink was emerald green. The seal bore the crest, lion, eagle, badger, serpent, and a great letter, *H*. Hagrid's hands shook so badly he almost tore the paper. He opened it. He read it. His heart hammered so loudly he could hear it in his ears. Dear Mr. Hagrid, we are pleased to inform you. He read it 3 times before his mind allowed him to believe it. Hogwarts. He was going to Hogwarts. His father's promise had not been empty. The world had not forgotten him. A door still existed, and it was opening. The letter listed supplies, robes, books, a wand, a cauldron. It included instructions for reaching Diagon Alley in London. Hagrid had never been to London. He'd barely been anywhere beyond those rolling hills. But now he would go, because hope is a powerful kind of courage, even when you're afraid. The journey was overwhelming. Trains, crowds, noise that felt too sharp after countryside quiet. Hagrid moved carefully through it all, trying not to bump into anyone, trying not to draw attention, though attention found him anyway. People stared. Some looked startled, some looked curious. A few looked unkind. Hagrid kept walking. Eventually, he found the grimy little pub, wedged between buildings, that muggles passed without noticing at all. The leaky cauldron, Inside it was dim, warm, and rich with smells. Butterbeer, roasting meat, smoke, spilled ale. Hagrid stepped in, and the room shifted. Heads turned, whispers started. Even at 11, he was enormous. His head nearly brushed the low beams. But then the barman Tom greeted him kindly enough. And that small kindness felt like a hand offered in the dark. Tom pointed him toward the courtyard. "3rd brick up," he said. "2 across." Hagrid tapped as instructed, wand in hand, borrowed and awkward, and the wall folded open like a breath. Diagon Alley appeared, a narrow street of magic and wonder, windows full of cauldrons and broomsticks, spellbooks and potion ingredients, owls blinking in cages, witches and wizards in robes of every color, moving freely as if the world had always been like this. Hagrid walked slowly, eyes wide, heart aching with a feeling he could hardly name. Here, magic wasn't hidden. Here, strange wasn't quite as strange. He bought books at Flourish and Blotts, though half the titles looked like they were written in another language entirely. He got robes at Madame Malkin's, which required more alterations than the seamstress had probably done all year. He visited the apothecary, where potion ingredients hung in jars, like preserved secrets. And then came the shop that mattered most. Asterisk, Ollivander's. The wand shop was narrow and dusty, stacked floor to ceiling with slim boxes. A bell tinkled as Hagrid entered, and an elderly man with pale, silvery eyes appeared from the shadows as if he had been waiting. Said Mr. Ollivander. Yes, Hagrid, I presume. His gaze was sharp, unsettling, as if he saw not just Hagrid's body, but the story inside it. I remember your father's wand, Ollivander said softly. Oak, dragon heartstring, 10 inches. Hagrid swallowed hard. Then came wand after wand. Some fizzled, some sputtered. One produced a burst of sparks that singed the edge of a curtain. Another caused a loud pop that made Hagrid flinch and mutter an apology. Ollivander grew more intrigued, not less. Tricky, he murmured. Very tricky. Finally, he selected a box as if choosing something precious. This one, he said. Hagrid took the wand, and the moment his fingers closed around it, warmth ran up his arm. A feeling of connection, of recognition, like a lock clicking open. He lifted it carefully and gave a hesitant wave. Golden sparks poured from the tip, swirling through the dusty shop like fireflies. Ollivander clapped his hands in delighted triumph. Yes, he breathed. Yes, very good indeed. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Hagrid. Hagrid left the shop in a daze, wand tucked safely under his arm, as if it might vanish if he didn't hold it tightly enough. He was going. He was truly going on. September 1st, King's Cross Station, was chaos and noise. But Hagrid moved through it with careful determination. His trunk was comically large, floating behind him on a levitation charm he'd only managed after several attempts. He approached the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, heart pounding, and then, with one deep breath, walked straight through. Platform 9 3/4 exploded into sight, the scarlet engine hissing steam, owls hooting, families crying and laughing and calling instructions. The air buzzed with excitement and nerves. Hagrid climbed onto the train, ducking under door frames, struggling to fit into compartments built for smaller bodies. Many compartments were full, and some filled quickly, only to empty again when students caught sight of him. Hagrid tried to keep his face neutral. He was used to it. At last he found an empty compartment near the back, where he sat alone, knees pressed awkwardly against the opposite seat, hands folded carefully in his lap. The train lurched forward, and London slid away. Countryside rolled in, fields, rivers, trees, the world turning gold and green beneath late summer light. Hagrid pressed his face to the window and watched, heart hammering with hope and fear, tangled together like vines. Somewhere ahead, Hogwarts waited. When the train finally arrived, the platform was lit by enchanted lanterns swaying in the cool night air. The scent of pine and stone and something ancient, something deeply magical, filled Hagrid's lungs. A booming voice called the first years together, and Hagrid hurried to join them, towering even among adults. They walked down a narrow path through dark trees, leaves whispering, branches leaning close. Hagrid's pulse raced. Then the forest opened. And there it was, Hogwarts. Vast, ancient, impossible. Windows glowing gold, like warm eyes. Towers climbing toward the starry sky. The castle perched above the black lake, its lights scattered across the water like jewels. Hagrid stood very still. For a moment, he felt as if the world had finally found the shape he was meant to fit inside. They crossed the lake in boats, and Hagrid sat alone, because the boats were small and he was not. It sank low beneath his weight, but held. He trailed his fingers in the cold water, staring up at the castle as it grew larger and larger. Then came stone steps, an enormous oak door, an entrance hall that swallowed breath with its grandeur. Torches blazing, tapestries moving in the firelight, staircases curling upward into shadow. They waited. They whispered. They trembled. And then they entered the great hall. It was beyond words. Long tables full of students, candles floating like captured stars. And above, the night sky itself enchanted, clouds drifting, stars glittering, moon sailing serene and silver. Hagrid's mouth fell open slightly. He had dreamed of Hogwarts, but this was different. This was real. This was too beautiful. The Sorting Hats sang, and their names were called. One by one, students sat. The hat murmured. A house was shouted. Cheers erupted. Then, Hagrid, Rubeus. Silence seemed to fall in a soft wave as he stepped forward. Every eye followed him. The stool creaked under his weight. The hat dropped over his eyes, and everything went dark. A voice spoke inside his head, warm and curious. Well, what have we here? Such strength, such loneliness, such tenderness. Hagrid held his breath. The voice felt the shape of him, the grief, the loyalty, the love he gave to creatures and wild places, the careful way he tried not to harm anyone, even when people hurt him. Hufflepuff would take you gladly, the hat mused. But there is courage here too. Quiet courage. The courage to stay gentle in a world that does not reward gentleness. A pause, like a thoughtful hum. Yes. I know. And then the hat shouted, Gryffindor. The scarlet and gold table erupted in applause. Students clapped him on the back, grinning up at him. Someone slid over to make room. Someone laughed and told him he'd love it there. Hagrid's chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in so long it almost hurt. Belonging. That night at the feast, surrounded by noise and warmth, Hagrid ate until his stomach ached. Because he could. Because no one was telling him he took up too much space. Because the world, for once, seemed willing to let him exist without apology. The days that followed were a blur. Moving staircases, portrait passwords, common room firelight. His bed had to be enlarged. His wand work was clumsy. Spells burst out sideways. A feather shot into the ceiling instead of floating politely. A teacup shattered in transfiguration when he tried to make it change shape, and it simply couldn't. Some students laughed. Hagrid went red with embarrassment, but he kept trying. And then, like a soft hand on his shoulder, there was one class that felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater. Care of magical creatures. Professor Kettleburn was enthusiastic to the point of reckless joy, patched together with prosthetics and scars from a lifetime of saying, "Oh, it'll be fine before leaning too close to something with claws." He introduced creatures other professors would never allow near students, and he did it with a grin that made you feel like you were being invited into a wonderful secret. Most students held back. Hagrid didn't. He knelt. He offered his hands. He spoke softly. The creatures responded, not because he was fearless, but because he was kind. Kettleburn's eyes shone. Natural talent, he boomed. Creatures sense a good heart, Hagrid. They always have. And something inside Hagrid relaxed. Something that had been knotted tight since his mother left. Since he was mocked. Since he was too large for the world. Here, with creatures that didn't care about rumors or bloodlines, he felt right. He began spending every spare moment near the paddocks, helping feed and groom, learning the ways animals moved, the meanings behind posture and sound. The forest edges felt like home. It was there, in those early Hogwarts days, when Hagrid was still learning the shape of belonging, that another boy first began to notice him. A fifth-year prefect with dark hair, careful eyes, and a smile that made people feel seen. Tom Riddle. Hagrid did not yet understand what it meant to be truly chosen by someone dangerous. All he understood, at first, was the feeling of being spoken to with kindness by someone the castle admired. And when you have been lonely for long enough, dear listener, you can mistake attention for friendship. You can mistake interest for care. You can open your heart just a little too easily and not notice the shadow slipping in behind the warmth. And that is where we will pause for now, right at the edge of the part where trust becomes the thread that can be pulled. Because the next chapter brings secrets. It brings an egg. It brings a boy who smiles like sunlight and thinks like a knife. And it brings the beginning of the tragedy that will shape Hagrid's life for years to come. Breathe softly, dear listener. Let the story settle around you like a warm cloak. Let the crackle of the fire return to the front of your mind, steady and patient. Outside, the forest remains still. Inside, the world is safe. When we last left Hagrid, he had found something he had never truly had before. A place that almost felt like it was made for him. Hogwarts. A home built of ancient stone and moving staircases, of candlelight and hidden passages, of laughter that echoed through corridors the way birdsong echoes through trees. He was still too big for most chairs, still too clumsy with his wand, still stared at when he entered a room. But he had Gryffindor's warmth around him now, and something even more precious, a reason to hope. Days fell into rhythm, lessons, meals, homework, the shifting patterns of castle life. Hagrid struggled in the places where precision mattered. Charms demanded delicacy. Transfiguration demanded focus. Potions demanded careful measurements and steady hands. His hands, dear listener, were not made for teaspoons. His wand didn't glide, it jolted. His magic didn't trickle, it surged. Sometimes his spells worked beautifully, unexpectedly, almost like a sudden breath of sunlight breaking through cloud. But more often, they misfired. They burst. They scattered. He learned early to take teasing with a stiff smile, to laugh when other people laughed, even when it stung. And then there was the one place where none of that mattered, the lawns beyond the castle, the paddocks near the forest line, the places where hooves marked the earth, where feathers and fur and scales mattered more than neat handwriting or perfect wand flicks. Care of magical creatures became Hagrid's sanctuary. Professor Kettleburn saw it too, saw how creatures seemed to relax in Hagrid's presence, how even the wary ones tilted their heads as if listening, how they seemed to sense in him a kind of gentleness that didn't have to be performed. And because Kettleburn was the sort of teacher who loved enthusiasm more than rules, he began letting Hagrid help more and more. "Come along," he would boom, clapping Hagrid on the back hard enough to make his robes shift. "Let's see if you've got the stomach for this, lad." Hagrid always did. He learned to approach hippogriffs properly. The careful bow, the steady eye contact, the respectful pause. He learned how to calm nervous creatures with low, soothing words. He learned that fear and aggression often look similar, and that patience is sometimes the only way to tell the difference. But perhaps most importantly, he learned that he was good at something. For a boy who had spent most of his life being too large, too strange, too much, being good at something felt like finally finding one solid stone to stand on. And that is when Tom Riddle stepped into his life. It happened quietly, the way the most dangerous things often do. Hagrid was in the library one evening, hunched awkwardly over a scroll of parchment, trying to write an essay that felt like it was actively refusing to make sense. The topic was something complicated. Dragon blood, perhaps, or the properties of certain potion ingredients. And Hagrid had written half a page that was mostly guesses stitched together with hope. He stared at it, cheeks hot with embarrassment, even though no one was paying attention. He considered crumpling the parchment. He considered giving up entirely. And then a voice spoke behind him. Smooth. Calm. Friendly. Having trouble, Hagrid? Hagrid turned and saw a boy older than him, a fifth year, handsome in that careful, polished way that made people look twice. Dark hair, neat, school uniform, immaculate, a prefect's badge gleaming on his chest. Tom Riddle. Hagrid had seen him before. Of course. Everyone had. Riddle moved through Hogwarts like someone who belonged in every room. Professors spoke of him with approval. Students watched him with admiration. Even the air around him seemed composed. Hagrid swallowed. Yeah, he admitted, voice low. I'm rubbish at this stuff. Riddle smiled, and it wasn't a cruel smile. It was the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd said something honest and safe. May I? He asked, gesturing toward the parchment. Hagrid hesitated, then slid it across. Riddle glanced over it quickly, eyes moving with effortless speed. Then he nodded. You've got the right information, he said, as if it were obvious. It's simply in the wrong order. Here, and for the next 20 minutes, Tom Riddle did something that felt, to Hagrid, like magic, far more impressive than any spell. He made it understandable. He explained with patience. He reorganized Hagrid's thoughts. He pointed out what mattered and what didn't. He did it without laughing, without sighing, without making Hagrid feel stupid. When they finished, Hagrid stared at the parchment as if someone else had written it. That's loads better, he said, blinking. Riddle's smile softened. Not at all, he said. You're not as hopeless as you think. Hagrid felt warmth bloom in his chest. Embarrassed warmth, the sort that made his ears go hot. Thanks, he mumbled. That's real kind of you. I like helping people, Tom said easily. And besides, he paused, tilting his head as if considering something. I've heard you have quite a talent with magical creatures. Hagrid blinked. Me? Oh, yes, Riddle said. Professor Kettleburn speaks highly of you. That did it. That hit the sore, tender place in Hagrid's heart, where approval lived. Hagrid's face flushed with pride. Does he? He asked, voice rough. Riddle nodded, and his eyes shone with something that looked like admiration. You understand them, he said. Most wizards either fear creatures or try to dominate them. But you're different, aren't you? Hagrid shifted awkwardly. He wasn't used to being described as different in a positive way. I suppose, he said slowly. They're not so different from people, really. Just want to be understood, treated right. Riddle's gaze held his. Exactly, he said softly. Exactly right. From then on, Tom Riddle made a point of noticing Hagrid, a greeting in the corridor, a few words at dinner, a smile in passing. Small things, nothing dramatic. But for someone who had spent so long being avoided, those small things felt like stepping into sunlight. Riddle asked questions too, polite questions.
Curious questions. What creatures did Hagrid like best?
What did he think of the Forbidden Forest? What did Kettleburn keep behind the paddocks? Had Hagrid ever seen anything rare? Anything unusual? At first, Hagrid answered eagerly, because it felt good to be asked. It felt good to speak about what he loved without being mocked. He didn't notice, at first, how carefully Riddle listened, how he remembered details, how his questions sometimes circled around the darker edges of creature lore, the things hidden in restricted books, the creatures classified as too dangerous, too illegal, too feared. Hagrid didn't see it because he didn't expect it. His heart had always been open. And lonely hearts, dear listener, are especially vulnerable to kindness that arrives wearing a friendly face. Weeks passed, then months. Hagrid, in his young, hopeful way, began to think of Tom Riddle as something like an older brother, someone clever and admired who still had time for him, still spoke to him like he mattered. And then, as these things often do, the story shifted. It began with an egg, not a dragon's egg. Not yet. Something else. Hagrid was in Hogsmeade one weekend, wandering the shops with wide-eyed curiosity. Hogsmeade felt like freedom. The smell of sweets drifting from honeydukes, the warmth of the 3 broomsticks, the hush of the old streets that seemed to know 1,000 secrets. He had made his way into the Hogshead Inn, dim and rough around the edges, smelling of smoke and sour ale, because it was quieter than the other places, because Hagrid liked quiet corners. He sat with a butterbeer, listening to low murmurs around him, when a hooded figure approached. The man's face was mostly hidden. His voice was raspy, like stone dragged across stone. "You're the Hagrid boy," he said. Hagrid blinked up at him, wary. "Yeah, I am." The man leaned closer. "I've heard you're good with creatures." Hagrid shifted. Praise always made him suspicious and pleased at the same time. I like 'em," he said. The man reached into his robes and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. He set it on the table carefully, as if it mattered. "I came across this," he said, "but I've got no use for it. Thought it'd be a shame to waste." He unwrapped the cloth. Inside was an egg, large about the size of a melon, with a soft leathery shell that gleamed faintly in the low light. It seemed almost warm, like it held a tiny heartbeat inside. Hagrid's breath caught. "What is it?" he whispered. The man's mouth curled slightly beneath his hood. "Acromantula," he said. "Rare's hen's teeth. Illegal to breed in Britain, mind you, but magnificent creatures. Misunderstood, like so many others." He pressed the egg into Hagrid's hands. Hagrid's fingers curled around it instinctively, careful, gentle, protective. And then the man stood, turning away as if the transaction meant nothing at all. "Take good care of it," he said, and vanished into the shadows of the Hogshead before Hagrid could ask another question. Hagrid sat frozen. His mind raced. Acromantulas were classified as lethal. Wizard killers. Predators. Not to be trusted. Not to be kept. He knew that. He knew that. He had read it. He had heard it. He had been warned about creatures like that. And yet, he held the egg in his hands and felt the warmth of it, the promise of life inside it, and something in him softened. It was small now, helpless, waiting, and Hagrid had always, always been drawn to the helpless. He told himself he would turn it in. He told himself he would do the responsible thing, the sensible thing. But he didn't. He smuggled it back to Hogwarts beneath his coat. heart thudding in his ears, and hid it in a box beneath his bed. A box he enlarged with a charm he barely understood, hoping it would be enough. Then he waited. 3 weeks later, the egg hatched. It cracked open in the quiet dark of the dormitory, and something unfolded from it. 8 spindly legs, small as twigs, a cluster of black eyes glittering with intelligence, and tiny mandibles that clicked softly like miniature scissors. A spiderling, an acromantula. Hagrid stared at it, breath held. It was no bigger than his fist. It looked up at him, and Hagrid, in his innocent heart, felt certain it was looking at him with trust. "Hello," he whispered. He hesitated only a moment before speaking the name that would shape so much of what came next. "I'll call you Aragog." He fed it scraps of meat. He spoke to it at night. He kept it hidden, careful, devoted. He watched it grow and grow. Because acromantulas did not stay small for long. Within weeks it was the size of a cat, then a dog, then larger. The box beneath his bed became less of a hiding place and more of a desperate attempt at denial. His roommates began to notice things: the strange noises at night, the faint smell of raw meat, the way Hagrid always seemed to be sneaking around. Hagrid tried to be careful, tried to keep control, tried to convince himself it would be fine. But secrets do not stay secrets forever inside a castle full of moving portraits and listening walls. And while Hagrid's heart was wrapped up in his secret, something else was stirring in Hogwarts. Whispers first, then fear. Students were being attacked, petrified, frozen in terror, found rigid as stone, eyes wide, faces locked in horror. The castle changed. The corridors felt colder. The laughter thinned. Professors spoke quietly behind closed doors. The air itself seemed to tighten, as if Hogwarts was holding its breath. And then, on a cold night in early June, a girl died. Myrtle Warren, found dead in a bathroom, lonely even in death. Panic erupted. The ministry arrived. Parents threatened to pull their children out. The headmaster warned Hogwarts could be closed, and Hagrid, young, frightened, already carrying a secret creature beneath his bed, felt the floor drop away beneath him. Because fear always needs a target, and when fear looks for someone to blame, it often turns its eyes to the one who is different. And that is where we will pause, dear listener, right before the moment everything breaks, right before the accusation, right before the snapped wand, right before the injustice that will follow Hagrid like a shadow for decades. Settle in again, dear listener. Let the fire soften the edges of your thoughts. Let the crackle of flame be the only urgency in the room. Outside, the night is stitched together with wind and starshine, and somewhere far off an owl calls, low, steady, like a lullaby meant for the bones. We return now to Hogwarts in a season when fear begins to creep into the stones, and even the grandest magic cannot fully hold it back. Because Hogwarts, for all its wonder, is still a place made of people. And people, when frightened, often choose the easiest story, not the truest one. It began with a feeling, a subtle shift. The castle still glowed with candlelight. The great hall still shimmered with its bewitched ceiling. Lessons continued, homework piled up, and the moving staircases carried students to and fro with their usual dramatic flourishes. But something had changed in the air. The laughter in corridors became shorter, quieter. The clumps of students moving together became tighter, as though the mere presence of friends could serve as a shield. Whispers began to bloom like mold in damp corners. Quiet, spreading, impossible to scrub away. Hagrid felt it long before anyone said it aloud. He felt it in the way people looked at him, just a fraction longer than usual. He felt it in the way a few students stopped talking when he entered a room. He felt it in the way professors' voices took on careful edges when they spoke about safety, about precautions, about the need for everyone to be responsible. Responsible. It was a word that always sounded like a kindness, until it wasn't. And Hagrid, even as a boy, understood this. When fear takes hold of a place, responsible becomes a knife people use to carve blame into someone else's skin. The attacks started slowly. A student found in a corridor, stiff as stone, face frozen mid-breath. Another discovered near a classroom door, eyes wide and empty with terror. Then another, and another. There were no visible wounds, no blood, no struggle, no obvious attacker, just bodies that looked alive, except for the terrible stillness. Teachers tried to keep things calm. They gave instructions in steady voices. They escorted younger students in groups. They placed invisible enchantments on doors. They increased patrols. They insisted everything was under control. But the students could smell fear like smoke. It clung to the air. It seeped under dormitory doors. It pooled in the corners of the great hall, like a shadow no candle could fully chase away. And every time another student was found petrified, the whispers grew sharper. What was doing it? Who was doing it? Why was it happening? The answers were vague and terrifying. A monster. A curse. A hidden chamber. A secret older than the castle. And in every rumor, threaded like a poisonous little vine, was the same quiet truth. People wanted someone to blame. Hagrid tried to keep his head down. Tried to be careful. Tried to focus on the one thing that had always steadied him. Creatures. Because creatures, in Hagrid's experience, were often simpler than people. A frightened animal did not pretend it wasn't afraid. A hungry creature did not hide its hunger behind a polite smile. A wounded beast did not gossip about who deserved the wound. Creatures were honest. So Hagrid spent more time outside whenever he could. He lingered near the creature paddocks, where the air smelled of grass and earth and feathers. He offered help to Professor Kettleburn whenever it was needed, carrying feed, fixing a latch, mending a fence that had been bent by something large and impatient. He liked those jobs. He liked the feeling of usefulness that didn't depend on being clever with spells. Still, even out there, the dread followed him, because Hagrid had a secret. And secrets, dear listener, are heavy enough on their own, until fear comes along and starts pressing down. Aragog. Hagrid had named him Aragog on the night he hatched, whispering the name like a promise. At first it had felt harmless, almost tender. The spiderling had been small enough to curl inside Hagrid's palm. It had looked up at him with shiny, intelligent eyes, and Hagrid had felt that familiar surge of something he'd carried all his life. The fierce desire to protect what was misunderstood. He'd read enough to know acromantulas were dangerous, but knowing something in your head is different from believing it in your heart. In Hagrid's heart, Aragog was not a threat. Aragog was a life, a responsibility, a friend. So Hagrid kept him. He hid him. He fed him scraps. He spoke to him in whispers late at night. He enlarged a box under his bed with the charm he'd half learned and half guessed. And when it worked, he felt such a rush of pride it almost made him dizzy. Look, he thought, I can do magic right. I can make something work. He told himself he'd keep Aragog only until he was older. Only until he could figure out a better place. only until he could ask Kettleburn for advice, without being forced to surrender the creature. Only until, only until, only until, only until is a phrase people use when they are trying to bargain with a future that refuses to be bargained with. Because Aragog grew, and he grew quickly. Every few days, Hagrid would lift the lid of the box and find the spider larger, heavier, legs stretching wider across the straw. The clicking of his mandibles became louder. The smell of meat became harder to hide, and Hagrid's worry grew alongside him. Not because he stopped loving Aragog, but because the castle was changing, and fear was making everyone's eyes sharper. One evening, Hagrid found himself in the library, struggling with an essay he didn't fully understand. The parchment was smudged. The words looked too small. His handwriting felt clumsy next to the neat lines of other students. He stared at it until the letters swam, and then, like he always did when he felt foolish, he told himself he would try harder. He would read again. He would write again. He would be better. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the petrified students, to the way the castle seemed to hold its breath. He looked around the library, and for the first time he noticed how tense everyone looked. Even books, those calm, silent things, felt heavy in hands that were shaking. That was when Tom Riddle appeared. Tom moved through the library like he belonged everywhere. He carried books with easy confidence, wore his prefect badge as if it had been born on him. Students glanced up when he passed, and their faces softened, as if his mere presence promised things would be all right. Tom stopped at Hagrid's table. "Hagrid," he said, and his voice was smooth and warm, like a hand offered at the right moment. Hagrid flushed. "Oh, hello, Tom." Riddle's eyes flicked to Hagrid's messy essay. "Working hard?" he asked lightly. Hagrid grunted, embarrassed. "S'pose so." Tom sat without waiting to be invited. He glanced at the parchment again, then began to speak in that calm, capable way that made complicated things sound simple. He helped. Not in a showy way, just helped. He suggested where to reorder a paragraph, which detail to focus on, how to make the argument clearer. Hagrid listened, grateful. And because Hagrid was hungry for kindness, because he had grown up with so little of it from his peers, he began to trust Tom more than he should have. Tom, after all, treated him like a person, not a spectacle, not a joke, not a half-breed to be whispered about, a person. And that kindness, dear listener, can be the most dangerous kind of bait. Because some people learn to mimic warmth the way others learn spells, precisely, expertly, for reasons that have nothing to do with love. As the weeks passed, Tom sought Hagrid out more often, sometimes in the library, sometimes after lessons, sometimes outside when Hagrid was carrying feed or walking near the grounds. Tom would ask questions about creatures, curious questions, detailed questions. What did certain beasts eat? How quickly did they grow? What were their habits, their instincts, their weaknesses? Hagrid loved talking about creatures. It lit him up inside. It made him feel like he finally had something worth knowing. So he answered. He spoke eagerly, hands moving as he described things. He talked about the way creatures behaved when frightened, the way they reacted to gentleness versus force. He talked about how often people harmed beasts simply by refusing to understand them. Tom listened with apparent fascination. And Hagrid, warned by attention, didn't notice the edge underneath the curiosity. He didn't notice how Tom's questions sometimes leaned toward danger. He didn't notice how Tom's interest sharpened whenever the topic drifted toward creatures the Ministry classified as threats. Hagrid didn't notice, because he wanted so badly to believe someone like Tom could truly see him. Then came the night at the forest's edge. It was late. The sky was bruised purple, the last light sinking behind the towers. The trees of the forbidden forest pressed together like a wall of secrets. Hagrid had gone there to clear his head. The castle felt too tight these days, too loud with whispers. Outside, among trees, he could breathe. He stood near the tree line, listening. There were ordinary forest sounds, rustling leaves, the distant scurry of small animals, the soft creak of branches, and beneath it, the deeper silence, the kind that made you feel watched by something older than you. Footsteps approached. Hagrid turned. Tom Riddle emerged from the shadow of the path, face pale in the fading light. "Hagrid," Tom said quietly. Something in his tone made Hagrid's stomach tighten. "What's wrong?" Hagrid asked, voice rough. Tom glanced around, as though the trees might be listening. "I need to speak to you," he said. "About what?" Tom drew closer, lowering his voice. "About the attacks." Hagrid felt the blood drain from his face. "What about 'em?" Tom hesitated, just long enough to seem reluctant. "I think I know what's doing it," he said. Hagrid stared. You do? Tom nodded. "It's a monster," he said softly. "A monster someone has been keeping hidden inside the school." The word monster hit Hagrid like a cold wave. His thoughts flashed to Aragog in the box beneath his bed, to the clicking, to the growing shadow of legs. "No," Hagrid whispered before he could stop himself. "No, it can't." Tom's eyes sharpened. "And," Tom continued carefully, "I'm worried about what will happen when the staff and the Ministry decide they need someone to blame." Hagrid swallowed. He could barely feel his tongue in his mouth. Tom stepped closer, voice gentle. "Hagrid, I know you've been keeping a creature." Hagrid's heart slammed. He tried, but the words tangled. Tom lifted a hand. "I'm not accusing you," he said quickly. "Listen to me. I'm trying to help you." Help, that word. Again. Warm, soothing. "I've heard rumors," Tom said. "People have noticed you sneaking about. The smell of meat. The odd noises." And with everything happening, Hagrid's throat tightened. "They'll blame you," Tom said softly now, like a friend sharing a fear. "They'll blame your creature, and you have no chance to explain." Hagrid's chest burned. "Aragog wouldn't hurt nobody," he blurted. "He's gentle. I swear it. He's my friend." Tom's expression softened. So perfectly kind, Hagrid almost wanted to cry. "I believe you," Tom said. "I do. But others won't." He leaned in slightly, voice dropping lower. "Fear makes people cruel, Hagrid, and fear makes them stupid." Hagrid nodded shakily, because it felt true. Tom paused, then added, "If you want to protect your creature, if you want to protect yourself, you must be careful. You must make sure no one finds out." Hagrid's mind spun. He wanted to ask what Tom knew. He wanted to ask how to fix things. He wanted to ask whether Tom thought Aragog could possibly be responsible. But before he could speak, voices echoed from the path. Lantern light bobbed through trees. Footsteps, many of them. Tom's head snapped up. Hagrid turned, and dread flooded him so fast he tasted it. Professor Dippet stepped into the clearing, flanked by other staff members and ministry officials. Their faces were grim, their wands were out. The air suddenly felt thin. Rubeus Hagrid, Dippet said, and his voice was heavy with certainty. Hagrid blinked. Professor, you are accused, Dippet continued, of endangering the students of this school. What? Hagrid croaked. You are accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets, Dippet said, and releasing a monster within. The words seemed impossible. No, Hagrid shouted. No, I didn't. I never. But the staff were already moving, already searching, already certain, because someone had found Aragog. Hagrid never knew exactly how. Perhaps a roommate had followed him. Perhaps a sound had been heard. Perhaps the panic had made people brave enough to pry into places they normally ignored. Aragog, startled by the commotion, reared in his enlarged box, legs scrabbling, mandibles clicking sharply. In lantern light, he looked exactly like what frightened minds wanted him to be. A monster, someone shouted. A wand flashed. Aragog snapped defensively, and the movement, pure fear on the spider's part, looked like aggression. It was all the proof they needed. Hagrid was seized. Hands grabbed his arms. Wands pointed at his chest. Voices rose and tangled. He tried to speak, tried to explain, but words drowned beneath panic. In the swirl of it all, he saw Tom Riddle. Tom stood slightly apart, expression carefully arranged into something like concern. He looked like someone who wished this hadn't happened. And Hagrid, terrified and desperate, clung to that look like a lifeline, because he did not yet understand how easy it is to wear sympathy as a disguise. The headmaster's office felt too bright. Candles burned, but their light didn't feel warm. It felt harsh. It made everything sharper. Faces, frowns, fear. Hagrid stood in the center of the room, enormous and trembling, while adults talked about him as if he weren't there. The students are in danger. The school could be shut down. We must act quickly. A half-giant boy keeping an illegal creature. Half-giant. The word fell like a slap. Hagrid's ears rang. It wasn't me, he said, voice cracking. It weren't me, I swear. Aragog didn't hurt no one, but no one listened. They wanted the fear to stop. They wanted parents to calm down. They wanted a clear story to tell. And the clear story was this: a strange boy, a dangerous creature, a tragedy. The dead girl's name was Myrtle Warren. Hagrid did not know her well. He'd seen her around. He remembered her crying sometimes. He remembered thinking she looked lonely in a way he recognized too deeply. Now she was dead. And somehow, impossibly, they were saying it was his fault. The truth didn't matter. The truth was complicated, and terrified people hate complicated things. The punishment came fast. There was no long investigation. No gentle conversation. No careful weighing of evidence. There was only the need for a solution. Hagrid was expelled. His wand was snapped. Dear listener, imagine the moment. Imagine Hagrid's wand, his first real proof that he belonged, placed in front of him like an offering, like a final chance. Imagine an adult raising another wand. Imagine the crack of wood splitting, a sharp, brutal sound that seems too loud for such a small thing. Now imagine Hagrid's chest tightening, as if the sound had snapped something inside him too. Because it did. A wand is not just a tool. For a child, It is possibility. It is identity. It is the promise that you are allowed to exist. And they broke it in front of him, like it meant nothing. Hagrid made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a shout. His hands curled into fists, helpless. He wanted to fight, to argue, to demand someone listen. But what could he do? He was 13. He was big. He was different. And in a room full of frightened adults, those things made him guilty before he opened his mouth. He saw Tom again, watching. Tom's face was calm, almost regretful. And Hagrid, poor Hagrid, didn't understand yet that some people can watch a life crumble and feel nothing at all. That night, Hagrid made one choice that belonged entirely to him. He saved Aragog. He waited until the corridors quieted, until the castle's usual hum softened into sleep. He moved carefully, trying to keep his enormous footsteps from echoing. He found the place where Aragog had been taken. The spider was caged, frantic, clicking and twitching. He was terrified. Terrified of wands, terrified of light, terrified of being trapped. Hagrid's hands shook as he opened the latch. "Go," he whispered. "Go on." "Hurry." Aragog hesitated. Then he surged out of the cage, legs moving fast, and vanished into darkness. Hagrid followed at a distance, heart hammering, leading the spider toward the only place he knew might hide a creature like that, the Forbidden Forest. At the tree line, Aragog paused, turned slightly, as if looking back with those many eyes. Hagrid's throat closed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." And in the clicking language Aragog used, the spider made a promise, simple, strange, and sincere in its own way. Hagrid was his friend, and he would not harm Hagrid. Then Aragog disappeared beneath trees, swallowed by shadow and ancient roots. And Hagrid stood alone, the forest breathing around him, feeling as if he had just let part of himself go into the darkness. Leaving Hogwarts was worse than arriving had been. When Hagrid arrived as a first year, he had been nervous but hopeful. He had imagined belonging. Now he left with his head bowed and his hands empty. He walked out of the castle carrying what little he owned, hearing whispers behind him like wind through dead leaves. Some students stared. Some looked away. Some looked frightened. No one came to say goodbye, because fear had taught them that being near him might be dangerous. Hagrid didn't blame them. He just felt hollow. The cottage in the West Country waited. It was the same place where his father's laughter had once lived, where warm firelight had once meant safety, where the garden oak had stood steady through seasons. But without his father, it felt like an abandoned shell. Hagrid entered and stood in the middle of the room, listening to the silence press against him. He sat at the table. He stared at the hearth. He tried to imagine what came next. He was 13. In the eyes of wizarding lore, he was finished. No wand, no school, no future. He wandered the hills again, because walking kept him from thinking too hard. He cared for animals, because animals still accepted him. He fixed fences for nearby farmers, muggle ones, who stared at his size but took his work because it was strong and steady. He slept badly. He dreamed of the Great Hall and woke with a jolt, reaching for a wand that wasn't there. Sometimes he woke with the sound of snapping wood still ringing in his head, and on the worst nights he lay staring at the ceiling, thinking the thing children think when they've been punished too harshly. Maybe I really am what they say I am. Then, one morning in late July, an owl arrived. A tawny owl, strong and steady, fluttered down and perched on the windowsill like it owned the place. It carried a letter sealed with the Hogwarts crest. Hagrid froze. His hands trembled as he took it. For a moment he didn't open it. He just stared at the seal. But the owl blinked at him patiently, and something in that calm steadiness helped. Hagrid broke the seal. The handwriting inside was elegant and flowing. Albus Dumbledore. By then, Dumbledore was headmaster. Hagrid's breath caught as he read. The letter was gentle, but it did not waste time. Dumbledore wrote that he did not believe Hagrid had opened the chamber. He did not believe Hagrid had harmed Myrtle Warren. He did not believe Hagrid's heart capable of cruelty. Hagrid read those lines again and again, as if he needed to make sure they were real. Someone believed him, not out of pity, not as a polite lie, as truth. Dumbledore was honest too. He could not restore Hagrid's wand publicly. He could not change the Ministry's decision. Those things were tangled in laws and fear and politics beyond even a headmaster's reach. But Dumbledore could offer something else. A home. A purpose. A place at Hogwarts, not as a student, but as staff. Keeper of keys and grounds. The words made Hagrid's vision blur. Hogwarts still could be his. He wasn't being cast out forever. He wasn't being abandoned to disappear quietly. Hagrid clutched the letter to his chest and made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He wrote back immediately. His handwriting was large and messy. Ink blotted where his hand shook. But the message was clear. Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll come. And within a week, he returned. Hogwarts looked different when you returned after being expelled. The towers still rose proud against the sky, but Hagrid could not look at them without remembering the moment his wand snapped. The grounds were still wide and beautiful, but he carried shame in his pockets like stones. Still, when he stepped through the gates again, something inside him loosened. He was home, not in the way he had once dreamed, but in the way a wounded thing returns to the only place it ever felt warm. Dumbledore met him. The headmaster's eyes were kind in that steady way that made you feel seen. Not judged, not measured. Dumbledore led him down toward the edge of the forest. A hut waited there, a small wooden structure with one room, a wide hearth, and windows that looked toward the castle lights. It wasn't grand, but it was real. This will be yours, Dumbledore said quietly. Hagrid stepped inside and stared. The place smelled like fresh wood and smoke. There was a kettle hook by the fire, a table, a chair that looked sturdy enough to survive a giant boy's weight. Hagrid's throat tightened. He had not realized how desperately he needed something that belonged to him. He turned to Dumbledore, unable to find words. Dumbledore simply nodded, as if he understood everything Hagrid couldn't say. That evening, Dumbledore visited again. He brought a gift, a pink umbrella. Hagrid stared at it, confused. An umbrella? He asked. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled slightly. The weather here can be unpredictable, he said. Hagrid took it. It was heavier than it should have been. He felt it immediately. A faint hum, like a distant chord of music, like something familiar vibrating beneath the surface. Hagrid's eyes widened. Sir, he whispered. Dumbledore's expression softened. You were treated unjustly, he said quietly. I cannot undo what was done, but I can return to you a small piece of what they tried to take. Hagrid's fingers tightened around the handle, hidden within the umbrella, concealed, disguised, were the pieces of Hagrid's broken wand, reassembled in secret, not whole in the eyes of the Ministry, but whole enough, a small rebellion, a quiet mercy, a second chance tucked inside something ordinary. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Thank you, he managed, voice thick. Thank you, sir. Ah, Dumbledore nodded once. Use it wisely, he said. Use it quietly. Use it well. And then he left, robe hems whispering across the floor, like a calm promise. The first weeks were strange. Hagrid woke early, because that was what the job required. He learned the routes across the grounds. Learned where fences needed mending, where gates stuck, where the earth grew soft after rain. He learned the hidden habits of the castle from the outside, which windows glowed latest at night, where students sneaked out to stargaze, where the wind howled loudest in winter. He learned to keep keys, to carry them on a ring that felt too small for his giant hands. He learned to be invisible in a way he had never needed to be as a student, because staff didn't belong to the student world. They moved around it, protected it, supported it. And Hagrid, quietly, began to build a life from that support. He helped Kettleburn with creatures whenever he could. He repaired cages. He carried feed. He calmed frightened beasts with that steady gentleness that had always lived inside his hands. And slowly, something shifted. He was still ashamed. But he was also useful. He was still lonely, but he was also needed. And for someone like Hagrid, dear listener, being needed is a kind of medicine. Some nights, though, the shame returned like a tide. Hagrid would sit by his fire, the hut warm, the kettle humming softly, and he would stare into the flames, remembering the snapped wand, the accusing faces, the whispers. He would remember Myrtle, dead because of something in the castle, and the way everyone had chosen to make it his crime. He would think about Aragog in the forest, living wild now, growing into something the world would fear even more. He would wonder if Tom Riddle ever thought of him, if Tom ever felt guilt. And then Hagrid would shake his head, because guilt was a feeling that belonged to people like Hagrid, people who loved too easily, trusted too deeply, and blamed themselves for the world's cruelty. He didn't yet understand that some people collect other people's pain like trophies. But life, even after heartbreak, keeps moving. The seasons turned. Hagrid grew older. He grew into his work, like a tree grows into soil, slow, steady, unavoidable. His hut became a place where injured creatures found refuge, where lost animals seemed to appear, as if the forest itself had begun to understand. Here lives someone who will not harm you. Hagrid learned the language of the grounds, not words exactly, something deeper. The snap of a branch that meant something large had passed. The hush of birds that meant danger nearby. The pattern of hoofprints that meant a creature was limping. He began, leaving clean water in stone basins, salt licks, bundles of herbs. He began earning something he had never earned easily from humans: trust. And in the quiet of that trust, his life ruined by fear began to become a life again. Not the life he would have chosen, but a life built from stubborn kindness, from second chances, from the refusal to become bitter. And in that, dear listener, is the heart of Hagrid, not power, not status, but the steady courage to keep loving anyway. That is where we leave him for now. standing at the edge of the forest with a pink umbrella in hand, a small hut behind him, Hogwarts glowing in the distance, and his heart still bruised but beating. Because ahead lies the long stretch of years, the quiet decades, the slow shaping of loyalty, the moments that will bring Harry Potter into his path, like a bright star falling into dark water. Settle back down, dear listener. Let the fire do what it has always done. Turn sharp things soft, and make even the darkest memories feel a little less heavy. Breathe in slowly. Let your shoulders fall. Let the story carry you the way a slow river carries leaves, because now we step into the years when Hagrid's quiet life, his steady, humble work at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, begins to touch the center of history. Not because Hagrid sought greatness, but because greatness, true greatness, often finds the kind. For a long time after his return to Hogwarts as Keeper of Keys and Grounds, Hagrid lived in the rhythm of small, important tasks. He woke before dawn. He checked fences and gates. He repaired broken hinges with hands strong enough to bend iron and gentle enough not to splinter wood. He fed the creatures that needed feeding, soothed the ones that needed soothing, and learned the moods of the forest the way sailors learn the moods of the sea. Some days were quiet. Some days were full of muddy boots and aching shoulders and laughter that came unexpectedly. When a creature did something ridiculous, when a first year dropped a stack of books, and Hagrid helped them gather them up with patient kindness. And some nights, on the coldest evenings, when wind scraped its nails along the hut's walls, Hagrid sat by the fire with Fang. Later, when Fang arrived, listening to the crackle of flames and the far-off murmur of the castle, like the sound of a distant, safe dream. He was lonely, yes, but there was a kind of peace in his loneliness. A kind of dignity, too, because he was useful. He mattered. He belonged to Hogwarts, even if Hogwarts did not always know how to say so. And that belonging, won not through applause but through endurance, kept him alive. Years passed. Students came and went like waves. Some greeted him with cheerful respect. Some avoided him. Some whispered cruel things behind hands and pretended they hadn't. Hagrid learned not to take those whispers into his bones the way he once had. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man now. And he had survived the worst the world could do to him. And in the quiet of that survival, he became exactly what Hogwarts needed him to be, a steady presence on the edge of danger. A guardian who did not need praise to keep watch. The wizarding world beyond Hogwarts, however, was not steady. It shifted. It darkened. Rumors began to drift in like smoke from distant fires. At first they were just that, rumors. A family missing. A strange mark found, burned onto a door. A muggle attack, explained away in newspapers as a gas leak or an accident, when anyone with magic in their blood could feel the lie in the air. Then the rumors became names, whispered ones, names people hated to say out loud. And at the center of those names, like a cold star rising, was the shadow of a wizard who had once been a charming prefect at Hogwarts, Tom Riddle, now called something else. A name carved from fear, Voldemort. Hagrid did not like thinking about him. The memory of Tom's smooth voice still sometimes rose like a bitter taste. Because even if Hagrid had not understood it at the time, even if his heart had been too trusting to see the truth, part of him had always known, deep down, that Tom Riddle's kindness had never been real. Oh, not the way Hagrid's kindness was real, not the way Dumbledore's was. Tom had been something else, a person-shaped hunger. And now that hunger was crawling across the wizarding world, swallowing lives, Hogwarts stayed protected, held in place by ancient enchantments and Dumbledore's power. But even inside the castle walls, the tension grew. Students returned from holidays with haunted eyes. Teachers spoke more quietly in corridors. The air itself seemed thinner, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Dumbledore formed a small, secret circle of resistance. People bound together by loyalty rather than law. The Order of the Phoenix. Hagrid was not the sort to duel with graceful wand work. His schooling had been cut short, his magic tangled up inside that pink umbrella, hidden and careful. But Dumbledore trusted him anyway. And Dumbledore, dear listener, never trusted lightly. So Hagrid carried messages that couldn't be sent by owl. He escorted people who were afraid to travel alone. He lifted heavy things and moved them where they needed to be moved. He stood in doorways like a wall, not for intimidation, but for protection. Because there is a difference between being frightening and being a shield. Hagrid was a shield. And when the world began to burn, people like shields become very important. Then came the night. The October night that changed everything. Hagrid was in his hut when the owl arrived. Fast, urgent, carrying Dumbledore's seal. The message was short, sharp with necessity. Come to my office. Now. Hagrid did not hesitate. He pulled on his coat, grabbed his umbrella, and ran across the grounds, with the wind biting at his cheeks. Dumbledore looked older when Hagrid arrived. Not in body. Dumbledore always seemed to hold time differently. But in the eyes, there were tears there, and something heavy, like grief, like dread, like relief, all twisted together. Sit down, Rubeus, Dumbledore said softly. There was no chair big enough, so Hagrid stayed standing, hands clenched. What's happened, sir? He asked, voice trembling. Dumbledore drew a breath. Voldemort has gone to Godric's Hollow, he said. Hagrid's heart lurched. James and Lily Potter are dead, Dumbledore continued. For a second, Hagrid could not understand the words. They felt like stones thrown into still water. Then Dumbledore's voice gentled, as if he was speaking around something fragile. But their son survived. Hagrid stared. A baby, Dumbledore said. Harry Potter. The killing curse rebounded. Voldemort is gone. For now, Hagrid's breath came out in a rough, broken sound. A baby, he whispered. Dumbledore nodded. And that baby must be taken somewhere safe, somewhere protected by old blood magic. Hagrid didn't fully understand the magic. He didn't need to. He understood the job. I need you, Dumbledore said. You alone can do this quietly and safely. Sirius Black will give you his motorcycle. Take the child and deliver him to Privet Drive, number 4. Hagrid's stomach twisted at the thought of leaving a baby on a doorstep anywhere, let alone in the Muggle world. But Dumbledore's eyes were steady. Do you understand? The headmaster asked. Hagrid swallowed hard. Yes, sir, he said. I'll do it. And Rubeus, Dumbledore added gently. Be kind. He has lost everything tonight. Hagrid nodded. He left at once. Godric's Hollow smelled like smoke and ruin. The house was half destroyed, as if something had torn through it with terrible violence. Muggles gathered in the distance, confused, curious, unaware of the true shape of the tragedy in front of them. Sirius Black was there, wild-eyed, shaking, and in his arms, a bundle. Hagrid took the baby carefully as if he were made of glass. Harry Potter. So small, so warm. A tiny heartbeat against Hagrid's palm. Hagrid looked down at the baby's face, sleepy, unaware, and felt something inside him shift, a protectiveness so fierce it almost frightened him. Sirius shoved the motorcycle toward him, voice breaking. "Take him," Sirius said hoarsely. "Take Harry. Keep him safe." Hagrid nodded, too choked to answer. Then he climbed onto the motorcycle, the enchanted seat shifting slightly to accommodate his size, and he rose into the night. Wind cut across his face. The world blurred beneath them, and Hagrid held Harry close, shielding him with his coat, murmuring soft words the baby could not understand but might, somehow, feel. "Don't you worry," Hagrid whispered. I got you now." Tears streamed into his beard, hot against the cold night air. He cried for James and Lily. He cried for the end of the war. He cried for the fact that a baby had become a symbol before he could even speak. And in that crying, dear listener, was Hagrid's true magic. He felt the world's pain and did not harden. Privet Drive was neat and silent and ordinary in the way that feels almost cruel after you've flown through darkness carrying tragedy in your arms. Dumbledore waited beneath a street lamp with Professor McGonagall, both of them wearing grief like a shadow. Hagrid handed the baby over, only long enough for Dumbledore to tuck a letter into the blankets, explaining everything, begging, though everyone knew it might not be listened to, for kindness. Then Dumbledore asked Hagrid to place Harry on the doorstep. Hagrid's hands shook. He knelt carefully, slowly, as if the world might shatter if he moved too fast. He placed the baby down, arranged the blankets, made sure the little face was shielded from the night air. Harry stirred but did not wake. Hagrid stared at him, unable to stand up again for a long moment. Everything in him wanted to scoop the baby up and run, to take him back to Hogwarts, to the hut, to warmth, to safety. But Dumbledore's hand rested on his arm, firm, gentle. "It must be this way," Dumbledore said quietly. Hagrid swallowed. "Good luck, Harry," he whispered, voice breaking. "You'll need it." Then he turned away because if he didn't turn away, he would do something he couldn't undo. He climbed back onto the motorcycle and flew off into the thinning darkness, leaving behind a baby who would one day change the world. And even as he flew, Hagrid carried the ache of that doorstep inside his chest. For 10 years, life returned to its rhythms at Hogwarts. Seasons turned. Snow fell. Spring returned. Students laughed again, even while the world outside tried to pretend everything was fine. The ministry spoke in careful phrases. People wanted to believe the danger was over, that peace meant safety forever. But Hagrid remembered the feel of a baby's warmth. He thought of Harry on birthdays, on quiet nights, on mornings when the sun rose too bright and his gut still felt cold. Sometimes he asked Dumbledore, Is he all right, sir?" Hagrid would say, trying to sound casual, but failing. Dumbledore's eyes would turn distant. "He is safe," Dumbledore would say. "That is what matters most." And Hagrid would nod, because he trusted Dumbledore, because Dumbledore had saved him. But inside, unease gnawed. Because Privet Drive had felt wrong, cold, unwelcoming. Hagrid couldn't explain it. But his instincts, those same instincts that could sense a creature's fear before it showed, told him that the place was not kind. Still, what could he do? He was not Harry's guardian in the eyes of law. He was only the man who had carried him once, only the man who loved him from afar. So he waited. And waiting can be its own kind of pain. Then, at last, the summer of 1991 arrived. Dumbledore called Hagrid to his office again. "It is time," he said simply. Harry's letters had been sent. They had been intercepted. The Dursleys were trying to hide the truth. Hagrid's hands curled into fists. "They're doing what?" he growled. "They fear magic," Dumbledore said. "And they fear what Harry will become." Dumbledore's eyes sharpened. "You must go to him," he said. "You must tell him who he is. Bring him to Diagon Alley. Give him his first real steps into the world that belongs to him." Hagrid's heart swelled so hard it almost hurt. After a decade of worrying, he would see Harry again. He would look into those green eyes. He would know. The hut on the rock in the sea was battered by storm when Hagrid arrived, rowing through rough water with arms that did not tire the way smaller arms would. The sky was black. Rain lashed down. Winds screamed. Hagrid reached the island and climbed up to the door, boots slipping on wet stone. Voices inside, sharp, angry. Frightened, he raised his fist and knocked. Boom. 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 Silence. A shrill voice demanded, "He go away." Hagrid did not answer. He pushed the door in. It splintered. He stepped inside like a moving mountain, dripping rain and seawater, and the room smelled of fear and stale resentment. The Dursleys huddled in the corner, and there, small, thin, glasses taped, eyes wide, stood Harry. Hagrid's breath caught, because there he was, the baby, grown into a boy, still too small for his age, still wearing clothes that didn't fit, still with that lightning bolt scar like a mark of destiny. And those eyes, Lily's eyes. Hagrid felt his throat close. For a second, he couldn't speak. Then he smiled, a huge, warm smile that made his whole face soften. "Harry," he said, voice rumbling like distant thunder, but gentle as a lullaby. "I haven't seen you since you was a baby. Oh, Bodes, Bodes." Harry stared, as though he wasn't sure the moment was real. Hagrid pulled a squashed box from his coat. "A bit battered," he admitted, "but—" "Happy birthday, Harry." Harry opened it with trembling hands. A chocolate cake, green icing. Letters a bit wonky, but honest. Harry looked at it like it was a miracle. "Thank you," he whispered, and the words were so small, so careful, that Hagrid's anger flared hot and protective, because children who are loved do not speak gratitude like they are afraid it will be taken back. Hagrid sat down, accidentally breaking the sofa, and told Harry the truth. "You're a wizard," he said simply. And when Harry stared, stunned and disbelieving, Hagrid felt something close to joy bloom in his chest. Not joy for the fame, not joy for the prophecy, joy for the simple fact that Harry would belong somewhere, that he would have a world, that he would have a chance at more than cupboards and cruelty. Diagon Alley dazzled Harry, and Hagrid watched that wonder with a tenderness that almost made him ache. He took Harry to Gringotts. He helped him gather school supplies. He waited outside Ollivander's because the shop was too small for him, but he listened for the moment Harry would emerge, holding a wand like it was a piece of his soul. And when Harry did, glowing with happiness, Hagrid blinked hard, because tears were always close to the surface where Harry was concerned. He bought Harry an owl, too, white as snowfall, bright-eyed and sharp. "Every wizard needs an owl," Hagrid said gruffly, as if it were nothing. But it was everything. It was a gift that said, "You are real. You belong. You matter." When Hagrid left Harry at Privet Drive again, it hurt. But it hurt differently this time. This time Harry was smiling. This time hope sat beside him in a cage of white feathers. This time the future was open. Hagrid walked away and felt lighter, even while worry still lived in his chest. Because now Harry knew. And knowing is the first kind of magic. Once Harry returned to Hogwarts, Hagrid's life changed in a way he didn't expect. Harry found him, and Hagrid's hut, the little wooden place at the edge of the forest, became something more than a home. It became a refuge. Harry came when the castle was overwhelming. Ron came too, big-hearted, loyal, loud in a way that made the hut feel fuller. Hermione came later, sharp-eyed, compassionate, always trying to keep them all alive. They drank tea that was far too strong. They tried to bite rock cakes that were far too hard. They listened to Hagrid's stories and laughed until the walls felt warm with it. And Hagrid, who had been lonely for so long, found himself with something dangerously precious. Friends, family almost. And when you have been alone, dear listener, family is a kind of sunlight. You lean toward it without thinking. Of course, Hagrid's love for misunderstood creatures didn't stop being complicated. A dragon egg appeared, because Hagrid is Hagrid, and dreams sometimes arrive in the shape of trouble. Norbert hatched. Norbert grew too quickly. Norbert set fire to things. Fang slept outside in terror. And in the end, Hagrid had to let the dragon go, sent away to Charlie Weasley, where a creature like that could live without burning a wooden hut to the ground. Hagrid cried like a storm. Harry comforted him. And in that comfort, their bond deepened. Because they understood each other. Both of them knew what it meant to lose things you loved. Then came the first war of Harry's school years. The one Hagrid accidentally helped feed, a hooded stranger in the hogshead. Friendly questions. A little too much brandy. A loose tongue. Hagrid mentioned Fluffy's weakness. Music. He didn't realize what he'd done until it was too late. When Harry later faced danger beneath the castle, when the truth came out, Hagrid's guilt was enormous. He sobbed in the hospital wing, blaming himself, calling himself stupid. Harry, weak but alive, forgave him. And Hagrid vowed he would protect Harry better. He meant it. Hagrid always meant things. Then the chamber opened again in Harry's second year, and Hagrid's old nightmare returned like a ghost. Whispers, suspicion, fear, and the Ministry, cowardly, eager to look like it was doing something, took Hagrid to Azkaban as a precaution. Hagrid, chained, was led away again. The Dementors fed on his worst memories. His mother's abandonment, his father's death, his wand snapping, his expulsion. But Hagrid held on to one thought. Harry would figure it out. And Harry did. Harry found the truth. Harry defeated the monster. Harry cleared Hagrid's name. When Hagrid returned to Hogwarts, he hugged Harry so hard it almost cracked ribs. "You did it," he choked. "I knew you would." And for the first time, the world, at least a little, had to admit what Dumbledore had always known. Hagrid was innocent. Time kept moving. Hagrid became a teacher. He loved his lessons so much he nearly burst with pride. He wanted to show students that creatures could be understood, that fear wasn't the only way to survive danger, that the world's prejudice didn't vanish just because Hagrid's heart was good. Buckbeak injured Draco Malfoy. More insult than harm. and the ministry used it as another excuse to punish what it didn't understand. Hagrid mourned Buckbeak as if he were already dead. Then, miracle of miracles, Buckbeak lived. A second chance. And Hagrid, who had spent his entire life needing second chances, clung to that miracle like a prayer. The Triwizard Tournament came with spectacle and heartbreak. Hagrid found himself falling, shyly, awkwardly, into something like love with Madame Maxime, another person who knew what it meant to be judged for size. And for a moment, amid all the darkness, it felt like Hagrid might be allowed a little happiness. Then Cedric Diggory died. Voldemort returned, and the world began to crack open again. Hagrid did what he always did when darkness rose. He stayed loyal. He worked for the Order. He protected. He endured. He even went to the Giants, his mother's people, with Madame Maxime, trying to keep them from joining Voldemort. It was dangerous and bleak and full of violence, and it ended with failure. But Hagrid brought back one life from that mission. Grap, a brother. A huge, confused, lonely half-giant who had been bullied by his own kind. Hagrid hid him in the forest, fed him, tried to teach him words, tried to teach him gentleness, and it was exhausting. It was dangerous. It was very Hagrid, because Hagrid couldn't see a lonely thing without wanting to help it. Even when helping might crush him. Then came Dolores Umbridge. Oh, a softness of voice, like sugar over poison. She targeted Hagrid because prejudice loves official permission. She inspected his classes. She mocked his lack of qualifications. She treated him like something dirty, at the edge of polite society. And one night, she tried to have him taken by force. Stunning spells hit him, many at once. They staggered him, but did not fell him. McGonagall rushed to defend him, and she fell. That sight, McGonagall collapsing, struck down, snapped something inside Hagrid, not into cruelty. Into fierce, protective rage, he fled into the forest, because he knew if he stayed, he might hurt someone, and Hagrid, despite everything, was not a man who wanted violence. He hid until the truth came out, until Umbridge fell, until Hogwarts could breathe again. But the war did not end. It only deepened. Then Dumbledore died, and the world, for Hagrid, lost its son. Hagrid found Dumbledore's body at the base of the tower. He gathered it carefully in his arms as if he could protect the man from death through sheer gentleness. He carried Dumbledore back to the castle, tears pouring silently, grief shaking his entire frame. Dumbledore had given him a home. What? A job. Trust. A second chance. And now he was gone. At the funeral, Hagrid carried Dumbledore to the tomb. He laid him down softly, as though softness could undo final things. Harry stood with Hagrid afterward, both of them trembling with grief, and promised they would keep fighting. Hagrid nodded, because that was all he could do. Fight. Endure. Love. The final year was a nightmare. Hogwarts under Death Eater control. Students punished. Darkness in the corridors. Hagrid stayed, doing what he could, sheltering frightened children, helping the resistance quietly, keeping his hut a warm place in a cold world. Then he was captured, taken, tortured, questioned. He told them nothing. Because even if they broke his bones, they could not break his loyalty. He escaped, battered but alive, and returned to Hogwarts because the battle was coming. He could feel it. The air itself tasted like coming thunder. And then it happened. The Battle of Hogwarts. Spells cracked through the night. The ground trembled. The sky burned green with cursed fire and bright with protective enchantments. Hagrid fought with everything he had, umbrella blazing, fists swinging when he had to, body shielding others. Grawp emerged, chaotic and loyal. Centaurs fired arrows. Creatures fled or attacked in confusion. It was madness. Then Voldemort's voice rang out across the battlefield. Cold. Amplified. Final. He claimed he had Harry, and in a clearing lit by Death Eater's wands, Hagrid saw Harry lying motionless. Face pale. Hagrid's world stopped. Harry, he whispered, and the sound that came out of him was broken. Voldemort forced him to carry Harry back. Hagrid's arms wrapped around the boy the way they had once wrapped around a baby on a flying motorcycle. But this time it felt like carrying the end of the world. Hagrid sobbed as he walked, tears falling onto Harry's hair, his hands gentle even in grief. In the courtyard, the defenders wailed. Hope seemed to die. But then, a twitch, a breath, the tiniest movement against Hagrid's chest. Harry was alive. Hagrid felt it like a spark in ashes. He held himself perfectly still, because that spark had to survive. And then everything erupted. Harry leapt away. The battle surged back. The snake died. The last pieces of darkness crumbled. And at last, Voldemort fell, not in glory, in emptiness. A body hitting stone. Final. Afterward, the world was strange and quiet, like waking after a long fever. The dead were mourned. The wounded were tended. The castle was repaired. Hagrid worked until his hands ached, clearing rubble, replanting gardens, tending frightened creatures that had been caught in the chaos. Harry visited him often. They sat by the fire, not always speaking. Sometimes there are no words big enough. Hagrid looked at Harry, alive, breathing, human, and felt gratitude so vast it made him dizzy. You did it, Hagrid said one evening, voice thick. We did it, Harry corrected gently. And Hagrid nodded, because Harry was right. It had taken love and loyalty and courage from many hands. But Hagrid also knew something else. Harry had always carried something rare. Not power, not fame. The ability to choose kindness even when the world tried to turn him hard. That was why he won. Years passed. Peace returned in quiet ways. Children were born. Lives rebuilt. Hagrid stayed at Hogwarts. He watched new students arrive, wide-eyed and trembling, and he felt that old tenderness, because he remembered what it was to arrive believing you might not belong. He became gentler with age. His hair went fully grey. His joints ached in winter. His steps slowed. But his heart never changed. Harry married Ginny. Hagrid cried so loudly at the wedding he nearly shook the walls. Harry had children, James, Albus, Lily, and those children came to Hagrid's hut for tea and rock cakes and stories. Ron and Hermione visited too, and their laughter filled the hut the way sunlight fills a room. Sometimes, in those evenings, Hagrid looked around and felt something settle deep inside him. Contentment. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that comes when you realize you have survived and, somehow, built a life worth having. And, when Hagrid finally grew too old to keep up with every task the grounds demanded, Hogwarts did what it rarely did properly, but finally learned it honored him. Not with grand speeches, though there were those. Not with shiny medals, though there might have been something like that too, but with something more meaningful. They remembered. Students told stories about him. Teachers spoke his name with respect. Creatures in the forest, those who live by instincts older than human prejudice, still trusted the paths he walked. Hagrid's hut became a kind of landmark, a place people pointed to and smiled, a place that meant warmth. And when Hagrid's story became legend, it was not because he had cast the strongest spells, it was because he had loved the most deeply. And love, as Dumbledore always said, is the oldest magic, the kind that outlasts fear. The kind that turns a lonely, half-giant boy into a guardian of a castle. The kind that carries a baby through the night and keeps carrying him, year after year, through every storm. So now, dear listener, let the story close gently around you. Imagine the hut again. Firelight flickering on wooden walls, kettle humming, the scent of tea and smoke and something sweet cooling on the table. Imagine the forest beyond the window, dark and vast and alive, but not frightening, because you know, somewhere out there, a gentle presence has walked those paths with kindness for decades. Imagine Hogwarts glowing in the distance, steady against the night. And feel what Hagrid's life was always meant to teach, that kindness is not weakness, that loyalty is not foolishness. That love, given stubbornly, repeatedly, even when the world doesn't deserve it, becomes a kind of protection. The summer after Hagrid left Hogwarts was not the kind of summer that smells of cut grass and laughter. It was the kind that settles heavy on the chest, thick with silence, where even birdsong feels too loud. He returned to the little cottage in the West Country with a broken heart and a broken wand, its snapped pieces taken away as though someone had reached into his ribs and cracked something vital. The rooms felt wrong without his father. The hearth still held ash, but no warmth. The table still stood, but no one sat at it. And every corner carried a memory that pressed close like fog. Hagrid was 13. He was enormous for his age. Too strong, too visible, too different. Yet inside he felt small as a stone in a river, worn down by currents he could not fight. He obeyed the ministry's order because he had no choice. He kept his hands away from spells. He tried to live quietly. He tended the garden. He walked the hills. He fed the animals that still came to him, because creatures, at least, did not care what the world accused him of. A fox would still accept a bowl of water. A wounded bird would still trust careful hands. But at night, when the wind slid around the cottage and the stars hung cold and distant, the shame returned in waves. They believed it. They chose me. They snapped my wand like it was nothing. And somewhere deeper than all that, like a bruise under bone, another fear lingered. If Hogwarts is gone for me, then what am I meant to be? Weeks passed, then months. The world kept turning even when his own life felt stuck. And then, one morning in late July, when hither painted the hills purple and the air smelled of sun-warmed earth, an owl arrived. Not a local barn owl, not a scruffy messenger bird. A magnificent, one broad-winged, steady-eyed, carrying a thick letter sealed with the Hogwarts crest. Hagrid froze with it in his hands, as if touching it might burn. He stared at the seal. He stared at his name written in elegant ink, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. When he finally broke the wax, the parchment inside was smooth and heavy, and the handwriting was unmistakable, calm, measured, kind. Albus Dumbledore. Hagrid read the words once, twice, 3 times. His eyes stung and blurred. Dumbledore wrote that he did not believe Hagrid had opened anything. that he did not believe Hagrid had harmed anyone. That fear had made people cruel and careless, and justice had been trampled under the rush to blame. And then, like a hand offered to someone drowning, Dumbledore made him an offer. Not student, not wizard in the Ministry's eyes, not fully restored, but home. Keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts, a place on the land, work with creatures, work that mattered. A place where his size could be useful, where his gentleness could be a strength instead of a joke. Hagrid's hands shook so badly he nearly tore the parchment. He wrote his acceptance immediately, clumsy letters pressed hard into the paper, as if he could push gratitude straight through ink. Within a week, he returned to Hogwarts. Not through the Great Hall like a first year, bright-eyed and hopeful, but through the side paths, the back doors, the practical world of the castle's beating heart. And when he first saw the grounds again, wide, green, endless, his chest ached with relief so sharp it felt like pain. They gave him a small hut on the edge of the Forbidden Forest, a wooden place with a stout door, a wide hearth, and windows that looked toward the castle lights. It wasn't grand. It wasn't polished, but it was his. And that first evening, Dumbledore came to see him. The headmaster, already looking older than his years, already carrying a weight invisible to most, stood in the doorway and smiled with quiet warmth. Hagrid tried to stand straighter, tried to speak properly, but his throat tightened. Dumbledore offered him a gift, a pink umbrella. Hagrid stared at it, confused, until he took it and felt the faint, familiar hum buried beneath its cheerful cover. The wand pieces. Hidden, repaired, disguised. Hagrid's breath caught. "Professor!" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled, not with humor exactly, but with the steady courage of someone choosing kindness even when the world chooses rules. "Use it carefully," Dumbledore said softly. "Use it quietly. And remember, Rubeus, your worth has never been decided by the Ministry." Hagrid nodded because he couldn't speak. His eyes blurred, and he wiped them quickly with the back of his hand, embarrassed, though Dumbledore never made him feel foolish for tears. From that day on, Hagrid belonged to Hogwarts in a way that could not be expelled. He learned the land like a language. He learned the rhythm of the seasons on the grounds. The way the lake mist lifted in the mornings, the way the wind changed when storms approached, the way the forest went quiet when something dangerous moved through it. He learned the creatures, too, not from books alone, though he read when he could, but from watching, listening, waiting. A hippogriff did not care about someone's record. A thestral did not care about someone's bloodline. A unicorn did not care about rumors. They cared about intention. Calm hands. Honest presence. Respect. Hagrid's great strength became a kind of steady usefulness. He could lift fallen trees without magic. He could carry injured creatures to shelter. He could rebuild fences in half the time it took others. And the loneliness? Still there. Softened around the edges, because the grounds were never truly empty. They breathed, they lived, they kept him company, stacked on years. Students came and went. Dumbledore remained. And then, slowly at first, the wizarding world darkened. Rumors drifted through the castle like smoke under doors, families disappearing. Attacks in the night. Names spoken in whispers. A wizard rising with followers who wore masks and called themselves Death Eaters. Hagrid didn't understand politics. He didn't understand power games. But he understood fear. He understood cruelty. He understood what it meant to be hunted because you were different. Dumbledore began to move in quiet ways. Messages carried, meetings held behind closed doors, allies gathered, and sometimes he asked Hagrid to help, not to duel, not to stand in front lines, but to do what Hagrid always did, to protect, to carry, to endure. Hagrid delivered messages too risky for owls. He escorted frightened people through rough places. He retrieved items from dangerous corners of the country, where ordinary wizards could not go unnoticed. He did it because Dumbledore asked. He did it because Hogwarts was his home. And he did it because loyalty for Hagrid was not a word, it was a way of living. Then came the night that cracked the world in half. October the 31st, 1981. Hagrid was in his hut, fire low, Fang not yet a part of his life. This was before Fang, before the hut grew crowded with years and old comforts. An owl arrived with Dumbledore's seal, and a message so urgent it felt like lightning. Come now. Hagrid ran, up the slope, into the castle, up the twisting stair to Dumbledore's office, heart pounding like hooves. Dumbledore stood by the window, his face turned toward the night. When he looked back, his eyes were wet. It was strange that Dumbledore cried rarely, quietly, like rain falling where no one could see. Voldemort is gone, Dumbledore said. For a heartbeat, Hagrid felt the impossible lift of relief. Then Dumbledore continued, voice heavy. James and Lily Potter were dead. A baby had survived. A baby had a scar. And the baby, Harry, had to be moved before the world could swallow him whole. Hagrid listened, stunned, as Dumbledore gave him the task. Go to Godric's Hollow. Take the child. Bring him to safety. Hagrid didn't hesitate. He traveled through the night to a village bruised by magic. A house blasted open. Roof collapsed. Walls shattered like paper under a giant's fist. Sirius Black was there, wild-eyed and shaking, thrusting a bundle into Hagrid's arms, as if he could not bear to hold it and grieve at the same time. Take him, Sirius rasped. Take Harry. And then, almost like a dream, Sirius gave Hagrid his flying motorbike. Hagrid climbed onto it with the baby held close, and the enchanted engine roared them into the black sky. Wind tore at Hagrid's coat. The world below was dark, and in his arms the baby slept, small and warm, unaware that history had just carved its name into him. Hagrid looked down at the tiny face, and felt grief and tenderness hit him together like waves. Don't you worry, he murmured, voice breaking. I got you. I got you, Harry. By dawn, he reached a quiet suburban street and found Dumbledore waiting beneath a street lamp with Professor McGonagall. McGonagall's face was stern, but her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked at the child as though her heart didn't know how to hold the idea of such loss in something so small. They spoke about protection, about blood magic, about the aunt's home being the safest place. Hagrid listened, uneasy. He stared at the neat house and felt something cold crawl up his spine. It looked too ordinary, too hard, like a place that would not understand softness. Are you sure? Hagrid asked, voice low. Are you sure? They'll treat him right. Dumbledore's gaze softened, but the answer was firm. He will be safe. And then Dumbledore asked Hagrid to place Harry on the doorstep. Hagrid's arms tightened around the child without meaning to. For a moment, he wanted to do the selfish thing, the simple thing, to take Harry back, to raise him himself in the hut, to give him warm food and laughter and stories by the fire and a dog at his feet, and a world where kindness was normal. But the world didn't work that way. So Hagrid knelt. He placed the baby down as gently as if setting down a fragile bird. He arranged the blankets. He stared at the lightning bolt scar and felt tears spill into his beard. "Good luck," he whispered. "You'll need it." Then he turned away before his heart could break completely. And the years passed. Hagrid kept working. He kept living. He kept carrying the quiet worry for a boy he hardly knew but already loved, with something fierce and protective. Every July 31st, he wondered what Harry looked like now. Every October 31st, he remembered the cold wind and the baby's warmth against his chest. And then, 10 years later, Dumbledore called him in again. The letters had been sent. The letters had been stolen. The boy's family was hiding him on a rock in the sea, like that could keep magic away. Hagrid's hands curled into fists. "They've been keeping him from Hogwarts," he rumbled. Dumbledore's eyes gleamed with that calm determination. "Yes. And now you will bring him his truth." Hagrid took the mission like a vow. He traveled through storm and sea, rowing toward a shabby hut perched on rock, the wind slashing rain sideways. And when he reached the door, he didn't knock politely. He arrived. The door burst open. Inside were 3 terrified muggles, big, pale, furious, and one skinny boy in glasses that looked too taped together, too worn, too old for 11 years of life. Harry Potter. Hagrid saw him, and something inside him softened into a kind of ache. The boy was too thin, too small, wearing clothes that didn't fit, standing like he expected to be yelled at for taking up space. But his eyes, green and bright, were Lily's eyes, and Hagrid felt the past and present click together like a lock turning. He gave Harry a cake that was slightly squashed and spelled wrong, because Hagrid had baked it himself, because love sometimes arrives lopsided but sincere. And then, with the simplicity of someone who doesn't dress truth in fancy words, he told Harry what he was: a wizard. The silence that followed was deep and trembling. Harry's face shifted. Shock, disbelief, then something fragile like hope, trying to stand up for the first time. And Hagrid, big, awkward, emotional, sat there and did his best to hold steady while Harry's whole world turned. The next day, Hagrid took Harry to Diagon Alley. He watched the wizarding world react like a wave, people staring, whispering, reaching out to shake Harry's hand, as if touching him could turn their fear into relief. Harry looked overwhelmed, like he might fold in on himself. So Hagrid stayed close, a steady shadow beside him, guiding him through the chaos. Gringotts, gold, vaults, the clink of coins, Harry gawking like someone who's never been allowed anything and doesn't know what to do with abundance. Books, robes, a cauldron, a wand. And then Hagrid bought Harry an owl, snowy white and watchful, and Harry named her Hedwig, with a tenderness that made Hagrid's throat tighten. When it was time to take Harry back to Privet Drive, Hagrid hated it. He left the boy at that neat, cold house again, and walked away with his heart pulled taut behind him like a ribbon. But this time, he carried the comfort of one thing: Harry would be coming home soon. September 1st arrived. Platform 9 3/4 buzzed with magic. Hagrid watched from the edges. He didn't interfere when the Weasley family, warm, red-haired, laughing, helped Harry find the barrier. He simply watched Harry board the train with his owl and his trunk and his wonder. And Hagrid felt something like relief settle into his bones. Harry was at Hogwarts, and Hogwarts, Hagrid's Hogwarts, would wrap around him like a cloak. It didn't take long for Harry to find Hagrid's hut. It happened the way it always did with lonely children and kind adults. They drift toward warmth, like moths toward light. Harry came with Ron Weasley at first, then Hermione Granger, and later others. They sat by the fire. They drank tea strong enough to wake the dead. They tried rock cakes that could have doubled as doorstops. And Hagrid, who had spent most of his life being looked at like a problem, found himself, for the first time, being looked at like a safe place. Harry talked. Ron laughed. Hermione scolded kindly. Fang, when he eventually arrived in Hagrid's life, snored by the hearth and thumped his tail whenever anyone said his name. It was simple. It was ordinary. It was everything. But of course, in Harry Potter's life, ordinary never lasts. One spring, Hagrid did what Hagrid always did. He saw a creature the world called dangerous, and he loved it anyway. An egg appeared in his hut, a dragon egg. He was proud of it in that boyish way of his, eyes bright, hands trembling with excitement. He talked about it like someone describing a dream that had come true. Harry and Hermione warned him, of course. Hermione's voice went sharp with panic. "It's illegal, Hagrid." Hagrid waved it off. "Just a baby," he said, as if that erased all risk. "Just needs someone to look after it." And then it hatched. A spiny little Norwegian ridgeback, blinking in firelight, ugly in the way newborn things often are, and somehow still heartbreakingly precious. Hagrid named it Norbert. Norbert bit him immediately. Hagrid didn't even flinch. For weeks, Hagrid tried to keep the dragon hidden. The hut grew scorched. The furniture suffered. Fang developed a healthy fear of his own home and started spending more time outside. And then Draco Malfoy saw, and the trouble rolled in like thunder. In the end, it was Charlie Weasley's friends, dragon handlers, who took Norbert away. Hagrid cried so hard he could have drowned the fire. He watched the dragon disappear into the night sky and whispered goodbye, like he was letting go of a piece of himself. And Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood with him in the dark, quietly holding that moment with him, so he didn't have to hold it alone. Not long after, something else happened. Something far more dangerous than a dragon in a wooden hut. Hagrid had been to the Hogshead for a drink. He was not a strong drinker, and it didn't take much for him to start talking too freely when someone seemed friendly. A hooded stranger asked questions, smiled, bought him drinks, acted interested, and proverbs. And Hagrid, warmed by attention, mentioned things he should not have. A three-headed dog, a trapdoor, the way music could soothe the beast. He didn't realize what he'd done until later, until Harry came to him frightened, saying someone was trying to steal something hidden in the school. Hagrid's stomach dropped. The guilt that followed was like a stone chained to his ribs. He confessed to Dumbledore, shaking, ashamed. Dumbledore listened with grave calm and did not scold him the way others would have, because Dumbledore understood something important. Hagrid's weakness was not malice. It was trust. Harry survived that year by courage and luck and love, and when he lay in the hospital wing afterward, pale and exhausted, Hagrid sat beside him and cried into his beard until his eyes were swollen shut. "I'm sorry," Hagrid whispered. "I'm so sorry." Harry, barely awake, told him softly that it wasn't his fault, but Hagrid carried the guilt anyway, because loving someone means fearing the ways you might fail them. Then came Harry's second year. The Chamber of Secrets opened again. The castle shifted under the weight of fear. Students whispered. Walls carried messages like wounds. And for Hagrid, it was like being dragged backward through time. The same shadow, the same suspicion. The Ministry came with cold eyes and easy solutions. Cornelius Fudge arrived with officials and declared Hagrid must go to Azkaban as a precaution. Precaution, as if you could lock someone away like a broom in a cupboard, just to soothe panic. Hagrid protested. Dumbledore argued. McGonagall stood rigid with fury. But the Ministry did what it always did when fear took the wheel. They took him, and before they led him away, Hagrid's gaze found Harry and Ron, hidden under an invisibility cloak, hearts pounding. And he forced his voice loud enough to carry. "If anyone wants to know what's going on," he said, "they should follow the spiders." A clue, a last gift, a thread of hope. Azkaban was cold in a way that didn't belong to weather. The stone itself felt hungry. Dementors drifted through corridors like grief-given shape, draining warmth from the air and joy from the mind. Hagrid's giant blood protected him from some spells. It did not protect him from despair. He sat in the dark and tried not to remember. But the Dementors made memories rise like ghosts. His father's death, his mother's abandonment, the snapping of his wand, the accusing faces. Still, he clung to one belief like a charm. Harry would figure it out. Harry would find the truth. And he did. Harry and Ron followed the spiders into the forest. They found Aragog, ancient, immense, bristling with eyes and hunger. They learned what Hagrid had known in his bones. The spider had never been the monster in the chamber. The true horror was something else, something that slid through pipes and struck without being seen. A basilisk. Harry went into the chamber and came back alive. The girl was saved. The monster was destroyed. The truth dragged into the light. And when Hagrid returned to Hogwarts, released, shaken but breathing, the first thing he did was find Harry and hold him so tightly Harry could barely speak. "You did it," Hagrid said, voice thick with relief. "Knew you would." Vindication should have felt like clean air. But it was bittersweet, because 50 years of suspicion does not vanish in one sunny moment. It leaves scars. It leaves that flinch inside you when footsteps approach. It leaves the instinct to apologize for existing. Still, Hagrid stood on the grounds again. He felt the grass under his boots. He smelled the familiar smoke of his own hearth. And he told himself quietly, while the castle lights warmed the evening, "I'm home. I'm still home." And dear listener, that is where we will pause for now, letting the fire settle low, letting the wind hush against the windows, letting the story rest like a blanket being drawn up gently to your chin.